The radiation storm painted the viewport crimson as Nora Voss guided her ship. The Sparrow, through the jagged field of asteroids. Her scarred hands moved with practiced precision across the manual controls. No autopilot could navigate this treacherous section of the Kepler belt with the finesse she possessed. Just a few more minutes, she muttered to herself, the ship's worn hull groaning as she threaded between two massive rocks, spinning dangerously close to one another. The Sparrow wasn't much to look at, a refurbished short-range transport with mismatched hull plates and systems cobbled together from a dozen different vessels. But it was fast, and it was hers. The communication array crackled suddenly, a sound that made Nora frown. Nobody transmitted in the Kepler belt. The radiation made signals unreliable at best. Dangerous beacons for pirates at worst. Yet there it was again, a distress signal, pulsing with desperate regularity. An old emergency frequency, military grade from before the collapse. Not my problem, Nora said firmly, her violet eyes narrowing as she adjusted course away from the signal's origin. She had cargo to deliver, a deadline to meet, and a reputation that couldn't afford another strike against it. The signal pulsed again, something in its pattern catching her attention, a subtle variation in the third sequence that marked it as authentic rather than a trap. Her fingers hovered over the controls. 8 years in deep space had taught Nora one crucial lesson: trust no one. After her discharge from the Scout Corps under circumstances she preferred not to remember. That philosophy had kept her alive. Damn it, she whispered, already adjusting the Sparrow's trajectory. The ship shuddered as she swung it around, its outdated stabilizers protesting the sudden change. The signal led her to Helios 9, a mining planet abandoned after its atmospheric processors had failed catastrophically 5 years ago. The surface was now a wasteland of superheated rock and twisted metal. Officially quarantined by the Planetary Alliance, Nora eased the Sparrow through the thick particle-laden atmosphere, her scanners picking up a single life sign amid the ruins of what had once been the planet's primary research facility. The landing was rough, ship's struts sinking into the soft, ash-covered ground as Nora sealed her environmental suit and checked her weapon, a heavy sidearm with modifications that weren't exactly legal in Alliance space. Heat slammed into her as she exited the ship, the air shimmering even through her helmet's filters. She moved with practiced efficiency, following the signal's ping to what had once been the facility's central hub. The interior was worse. Support beams groaned under structural collapse, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of melted synthetics. Nora navigated through the wreckage, past fallen equipment and the occasional remnants of what might have once been human. She found him in what appeared to be a former security center, a man chained to a support column, head hanging limply forward. His auburn hair was matted with ash and blood, his clothing partially melted into his skin in places that made Nora wince. For a moment, she stood motionless, her instincts screaming caution while her eyes took in the details. His breathing was shallow but present. The chains showed signs of recent application, not the work of scavengers, but something more organized. A section of ceiling collapsed nearby, sending a shower of sparks across the room. There was no time for further analysis. Nora drew a compact plasma cutter from her belt and made quick work of the chain. The man made a small sound as she lifted him but didn't regain consciousness. It was lighter than he should have, been evidence of prolonged malnutrition. The way back was more treacherous than the entry, twice forcing Nora to find alternate routes as flaming debris blocked their path. They reached the ship just as a major section of the complex collapsed behind them, sending a shockwave of dust and debris in all directions. Nora sealed the airlock and laid the man on the small medical cot in the rear compartment of the Sparrow as the ship lifted off. She looked back at the burning complex, now almost entirely consumed by flames. Something about this rescue felt wrong, too convenient, too staged, but she pushed the thought aside as she plotted a course to the nearest outpost. The stranger was watching her when she entered the medical compartment 6 hours later. Amber eyes alert and calculating, not the disorientation typical of trauma victims. "You have a name?" Nora asked, leaning against the compartment wall and keeping a deliberate distance. "Ilian," he replied after a moment, his voice surprisingly Steady, Elian Thorne. So, Elian Thorne, Nora said, crossing her arms as she studied him from across the medical compartment. Want to tell me what a person with your obvious education was doing chained up in a burning research complex on a dead planet? A slight smile touched his cracked lips. You noticed? Hard not to. Your accent places you from the inner worlds. She gestured to where the chains had left marks on his wrists. Those restraints were military grade. And that distress signal used a frequency code that hasn't been in circulation for at least a decade. Ilian attempted to sit up, wincing slightly before settling against the wall. The Sparrow's medical scanner had done its work. Synthetic skin grafts covered the worst burns, and hydration supplements had brought his vitals back to acceptable levels. You have good intuition, Nora Voss. The use of her full name sent a jolt of tension through her. She hadn't introduced herself. I believe you didn't understand who the real target was, he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. They weren't trying to kill me. They wanted you to come. Nora's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon. Explain. I was the bait. Elian's voice remained steady, but something in his expression shifted, a hardness surfacing beneath the veneer of the waste. Victim. For you, Nora Voss. The ship suddenly felt much smaller, the hum of its engines taking on an ominous quality. Nora's mind raced through possibilities. A old enemy, a bounty, military intelligence, corporate vengeance. Her past offered to many candidates who, she demanded, her voice hardening. Elian met her gaze. The Syndicate. They need your navigation skills, your unique ability to traverse the drift without conventional guidance systems. Nora's face revealed nothing, but her pulse quickened. The drift-in, uncharted region of space where normal navigation systems failed. Few pilots could navigate it. Fewer still lived to tell about it. So they have my brother Tarek, Elian continued, his composure cracking slightly. When they captured us both, they explained what they needed. He looked away. I told myself helping them was the only way to keep him alive. And now I realize I was wrong about everything, Elian replied. They never intended to release him, no matter what I did. They just needed us both as leverage. Nora paced the small confines of the cockpit, attempts to reach any external communications network meeting, nothing but silence. The ship's systems showed everything functioning normally, but each outgoing signal disappeared into the void without acknowledgement. The comms are being actively blocked, she stated flatly when she returned to the medical compartment. Jammed, intercepted, and erased. I know. Elian ran a hand through his auburn hair, wincing as his fingers caught in the tangles. I was held for 3 months. Why didn't they just kill you? Because I have a brother. His voice remained steady, but his hands trembled slightly. Tarek, 2 years younger. Brilliant xenobiologist. We were working together on classified research when they came. Who exactly are they? Security forces. No insignias, no identifiers. Professional. He met her gaze directly. He said if I didn't cooperate in setting you up, they'd kill him slowly. Nora's expression hardened. And you believe them? They sent me recordings. The clinical detachment. In his voice couldn't quite mask the underlying horror. Just enough to prove he was still alive, still intact. Just enough to ensure my cooperation. As night cycle fell aboard the Sparrow, Nora found herself unable to sleep, her thoughts returning to Elian's story. I wasn't a hero she'd abandoned. That identity when the military had branded her a coward for a decision that still haunted her dreams. She found Elian in the ship's small galley, staring out the viewport at the stars, streaking past. Without the grime and blood, with his burns healing, she could see he was handsome in a scholarly way. We'll reach Meridian Station in 6 hours, she said, pouring herself a cup of synthetic coffee. You can contact the authorities there. Have people at Meridian? Elian replied without turning. We'd never make it off the station alive. That's not my problem. But even as she said it, Nora felt the familiar pull of something she'd thought long dead, a sense of responsibility. They'll come for you eventually, Elian said softly. The Syndicate wants control of the drift routes. With them, they can move their operations beyond Alliance reach. Nora sighed, leaning against the bulkhead beside him. And your brother? What exactly were you researching that made you both so valuable? Elion finally turned to face her, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his amber eyes, neural mapping across species. Theoretically, the technology could be used for instant language translation, sharing of knowledge, or control, Nora finished for him. Yes, he admitted. In the wrong hands, it could allow one consciousness to influence another. Their proximity suddenly felt charged with something beyond the tension of their situation. Nora found herself noticing the curve of his jaw, the intensity in his gaze. "I need to check our course," she said abruptly, stepping away as she adjusted their trajectory in the cockpit. A transmission broke through the interference, fragmented but clear enough to chill her blood. Set. ... Recovered ... Vast ... Terminate. Witnesses. Nora's decision was made before she consciously acknowledged it. She altered their course away from Meridian Station, toward the edge of charted space. When Elion found her there an hour later, the question in his eyes was obvious. "There. Tracking us," she said simply. "And they've just upgraded you from bait to liability." The Sparrow drifted silently among the frozen fragments of a shattered moon, its systems powered down to minimum life support. Through the viewport, the gaseous giant Halcyon loomed enormous, its swirling storms casting strange, shifting light across the cockpit. "They won't find us here," Nora said, checking the passive scanners one last time. "At least not immediately." Elion stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Over the past 3 days, as they'd evaded pursuit through increasingly remote sectors, something had shifted between them, a gradual erosion of distrust, placed by a tentative alliance born of necessity. "How long can we stay?" he asked. 12 hours before life support becomes an issue." Nora turned from the console, the blue glow of Halcyon illuminating her features in the dimness. "Long enough to make a plan that isn't just running." They moved to the ship's small common area, where Nora unfolded a physical star chart safer than digital navigation systems that might be detected. "My brother is being held here," Elion said, pointing to a remote installation at the edge of a restricted zone. Nexus Prime, officially a pharmaceutical research facility. Nora zoomed in on the location. Unofficially, the Syndicate's primary research center. Heavily guarded, state-of-the-art security. His finger traced the outline of the facility. Tarek is in the lower levels, where they conduct their neural mapping experiments. "You're talking about a 2-person infiltration of one of the most secure facilities in the Outer Rim," Nora said flatly. "That's suicide." Elion's eyes met hers. "No, it's asking too much. You could drop me at the nearest neutral port and watch you get yourself killed." Nora surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I didn't pull you out of a burning building just to abandon you to a worse fate." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken meaning. Elion's hand moved across the table hesitantly, covering hers. "Why did you come for me on Helios 9? He asked softly. "You could have ignored the signal." Nora looked away, uncomfortable with the vulnerability his question exposed. "I made a promise to myself once, after ... She paused. "After a mission went wrong." "The Cirrus expedition," Elion said quietly. "You were there?" Nora stiffened. "How? Do you, everyone in the scientific community, knows the story?" "The military scout who supposedly abandoned the research team during the evacuation." "I didn't abandon them," Nora snapped, old pain flaring bright and sharp. "The outpost was already compromised when I arrived. Radiation poisoning from the damaged reactors, terminal for most of them." Her hands clenched into fists. "They begged me to take the children, the few who still had a chance. 23 adults stayed behind so 17 children could live. But the official report protected the corporation that cut corners on the reactor shielding." Nora's voice was bitter. "It's better to blame one scout than admit to causing a radiation disaster that killed an entire scientific expedition." Elion's grip on her hand tightened. "I didn't know." Nora pulled away, uncomfortable with the sympathy in his eyes. "The children were quietly distributed to new families. The corporation paid for their silence, and I became the coward who left civilians to die." The silence that followed was different, no longer charged with suspicion, but weighted with shared understanding later. As they prepared for their approach to Nexus Prime, Elian found Nora in the ship's tiny washing facility, attempting to reach a burn on her shoulder, a souvenir from Helios 9 she hadn't mentioned. "Let me," he said, taking the medicated patch from her fingers. She stiffened, but allowed him to apply it, his touch gentle against her skin. "The Syndicate doesn't just want control of the drift routes," he said quietly as he worked. "My research hour. Research it was meant to help people with neurological damage, but in their hands, ... mind control," Nora supplied. "Not exactly. More like ... influence. Suggesting thoughts that feel like your own." His fingers lingered on her shoulder. "They've already successfully tested it on prisoners." Nora turned to face him, suddenly aware of their proximity in the confined space. "And your brother?" Pain flashed across Elian's features. "He refused to cooperate. That's why they needed me to continue the work." Without thinking, Nora reached up her fingers, brushing a strand of hair from his face. The gesture surprised them both. "We'll get him out," she said with a certainty she didn't entirely feel. Elian's hand caught hers, holding it against his cheek. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibilities. "Nora," he whispered, her name a question on his lips. Her answer came not in words, but in the closing of distance between them, her mouth finding his with a hunger that startled them both. His arms encircled her, drawing her against him as the kiss deepened, releasing tension that had built between them since that first moment in the burning facility when they finally broke apart. Breathless, Nora rested her forehead against his. "This complicates things," she murmured. Elian's smile was warm against her skin. "I think things were already complicated." As they drifted in the shadow of Halcyon, their bodies found each other again in the narrow confines of Nora's quarters, a brief respite of connection before they would face the dangers that awaited them. Nora adjusted the collar of her stolen security uniform, the fabric stiff and uncomfortable against her neck. Beside her, Elian wore an identical uniform, though his fit, better a stroke of luck rather than planning. "Remember," she whispered. As they approached the staff entrance to Nexus Prime, "We have 15 minutes before the shift change alerts go out. Stay close. Keep your head down." The plan was simple in theory. Use the stolen credentials to access the facility, locate Tarek, and extract him during the scheduled maintenance blackout that would temporarily disable the security systems. In practice, Nora knew 100 things could go wrong. The security scanner hummed as they passed through, stolen ID chips in their badges transmitting the expected signals. A guard nodded absently as they entered just 2 more technicians, beginning their shift. "Lower-level access is restricted," Elian murmured as they navigated the sterile corridors. "We'll need to access the central security hub to override the elevator protocols." They moved with practiced efficiency, the result of 3 days of intense preparation. Nora had drilled Elian relentlessly on facility protocols gleaned from similar installations she'd encountered during her military days. The security hub was minimally staffed. Just 2 officers monitoring screens displaying feeds from throughout the facility. Nora approached confidently, datapad in hand. "Maintenance authorization for Level B," she stated, sliding the pad across to the senior officer. "Director Weber's orders." The officer frowned, scanning the falsified authorization. "This isn't scheduled." "Emergency protocol," Nora replied smoothly. "Fluctuations in the containment field. Directa doesn't want any disruptions to the Thorn project." The mention of Tarek's name produced the desired effect. Officer's expression shifted from suspicion to concern as he authorized their access. "Have 60 minutes, he said, handing back the pad. After that, system protocols automatically reset. In the elevator descending to Level B, Elian's composure finally cracked. That was too easy. Nora's hand moved to her concealed weapon. "I know." Level B was nothing like the utilitarian upper floors. Here, polished surfaces and advanced technology created an atmosphere more akin to a high-end research laboratory than a detention facility. The few staff they encountered barely glanced at them, focused on their own tasks. "Cell Block C," Elian whispered, consulting the facility schematic they'd memorized. That's where they'd keep him. They found Tarek in a glass-walled chamber, not restrained, but clearly not free. He sat motionless on a simple bed, staring at nothing. His resemblance to Ilion evident despite his shorter, darker hair and leaner build. Ilion's sharp intake of breath drew a nearby technician's attention. "You're not authorized for this section," the woman said, moving to block their path. Nora acted without hesitation, her hand striking a precise point on the technician's neck that rendered her unconscious before she could raise an alarm. They dragged her into an empty monitoring room. Tarek Elion called softly as they entered his brother's chamber. "It's me. We're getting you out." Tarek's eyes focused slowly, recognition dawning gradually. "Leon." His voice was rough from disuse. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "We know," Nora said, already checking the corridor. "Can you walk?" Tarek stood unsteadily. "They've done something to me. Something in my head." His fingers tapped an irregular pattern against his temple. "I can feel it, ... watching." "We'll deal with that later," Nora insisted. "Right now, we need to move." They were halfway to the emergency exit when the alarms began, not the expected response to an escape, but a facility-wide alert that sent staff running in all directions. "Containment breach in Section D," a computerized voice announced calmly over the chaos. "All personnel evacuate immediately." "This isn't about us," Nora realized aloud, grabbing Elion's arm. "Something else has gone wrong." They used the confusion to their advantage, moving against the flow of evacuating personnel toward the maintenance tunnels that would lead them to their extraction point. Tarek stumbled between them, his movements increasingly uncoordinated. "He's not well," Elion said, concern evident in his voice. "We just need to get to the ship," Nora replied, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. They were within sight of the maintenance exit when security forces appeared at both ends of the corridor, weapons raised. "Surrender now," the lead officer commanded. "There's nowhere to go." Nora assessed their options in an instant. The ventilation shaft to their right. It's barely large enough for one person, or the laboratory to their left, offering temporary cover, but ultimately a dead end. "Take him," she told Elion, pushing both brothers toward the ventilation shaft. "I'll hold them off and find another way out." "No," Elion protested, even as he helped Tarek toward the opening. "We stay together." "Not negotiable," Nora snapped, already drawing her weapon. "Get him to the ship. If I'm not there in 20 minutes, leave without me." Their eyes met in a moment of silent communication, fear, determination, and something deeper passing between them. "I'll come back for you," Elion promised. "I know," Nora replied, though they both recognized the lie, as the brothers disappeared into the shaft. Nora turned to face the approaching security forces, her weapon raised. Oh, she didn't intend to kill. These were just people doing their jobs, but she needed to buy time. The first shots from her modified stunner dropped 2 officers, creating momentary confusion. Nora used it to dash into the laboratory, overturning tables to create cover as return fire shattered equipment around her. A sharp pain in her side told her at least one shot had found its mark. She pressed her hand against the wound, feeling the warm wetness of blood seeping through her uniform. "Not ideal," she muttered, searching for another exit as security forces positioned themselves outside the laboratory doors. Her gaze fell on the environmental controls, specifically the fire suppression system. With a grim smile, Nora fired, directly at the chemical dispersal unit. Mounted on the ceiling, the resulting explosion was more impressive than she'd anticipated, filling the laboratory and corridor beyond with dense choking foam and triggering a cascade of secondary system failures. In the confusion, Nora slipped past the disoriented security forces, pressing her hand firmly against her wounded side as she navigated toward an alternate exit by the time she reached the Sparrow's hidden landing site. To blur from blood loss, Leon stood at the ship's ramp, weapon in hand, relief washing over his features as she staggered into view. "You're hurt," he said, supporting her weight as they entered the ship. "Just a scratch," Nora managed through gritted teeth. "Is Tarek secure?" "Yes, but he's not well. The neural implants, they're more extensive than we thought." As the Sparrow lifted off, evading the facility's defensive systems with a series of maneuvers that pushed the ship to its limits, Nora fought to remain conscious at the controls. "I've got this," Elian said, gently moving her aside to take over navigation. "Let me help you for a change." Through the haze of pain, Nora watched him guide her ship with surprising skill. His hands steady on controls, he'd only observed her. In that moment, she realized just how much had changed since she'd pulled him from the burning ruins of Helios 9. "I knew you'd make it," he said softly as they broke atmosphere, the stars opening before them. Nora replied with a weak smile before darkness finally claimed her. Nora awoke to the soft hum of unfamiliar machinery. For a panicked moment, she thought they'd been captured until Elian's face came into focus above her. "Welcome back," he said, relief evident in his tired smile. "You had me worried." She tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her side. "Where are we?" "Frontier outpost on Cassina 6. Independent. No Alliance presence. No Syndicate control." Nora took in their surroundings a small medical facility, basic but clean. Tarek, Leon's expression sobered. "Stable, but the neural implants are problematic. They're integrated with his autonomous nervous system. Removing them would kill him." "But they can track him through them," Nora said, remembering the technician's warnings at Nexus Prime. "Not anymore." A new voice joined the conversation as a woman entered the room, middle-aged. With streaks of silver in her dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority, "We've managed to isolate the tracking function without disrupting the neural pathways," Dr. Jansen Elian explained. "An old colleague, one of the few people I still trust." "The influence protocols are another matter," Dr. Jansen continued, checking Nora's vitals with practiced efficiency. "They're encoded at a deeper level. I can block them temporarily, but a permanent solution will take time, which we don't have," Nora guessed. "The Syndicate has resources throughout this sector," Elian confirmed. "It won't take them long to trace us here." 3 days later, Nora stood on a small observation deck overlooking the dusty mining colony that comprised most of Cassina 6. Her wound was healing well, thanks to Dr. Jansen's skilled care, but the bigger questions remained unanswered. She sensed, rather than heard Elian approach, his footsteps almost silent on the metal grating. "Tarek remembers fragments," he said, joining her at the railing. "Enough to be dangerous to the Syndicate." "What exactly was he working on?" "Neural pathway manipulation specific to the command centers of the brain." Elian's voice was grim. "The technology could override free will without the subject even realizing it. Perfect for creating sleeper agents, assassins, or puppets in positions of power. And they have this technology now? An early version? Without Tarek's research, they can't refine it for widespread use." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "That's why they won't stop coming for him. For us." Nora considered this. In the week since their escape from Nexus Prime, she'd had time to piece together the larger picture, how her disgrace after the Cirrus expedition had been engineered to remove her from military service, making her the perfect, deniable asset for the Syndicate's operations. Dr. Jansen found something interesting in the implant's coding, Elian continued. A signature. The technology was developed by Helix Industries, the same corporation that owned the Cirrus Research Station, Nora said, the final piece clicking into place. "This goes beyond the Syndicate. It always does." Elian's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a familiarity that still surprised her. What now? It was the question they'd both been avoiding. Sparrow was repaired, refueled, and ready to fly. Nora could disappear into the drift, using her unique navigation skills to vanish beyond anyone's reach. It would be the logical choice, though. Survivor's choice. But as she looked at Elian, she recognized something had fundamentally changed. The woman who had pulled him from that burning facility was not the same woman who stood here now, contemplating a future that involved more than just survival. "We fight back," she said simply. Elian's eyes widened slightly. "That's not what I expected you to say." "Me neither." Nora smiled, the expression still feeling somewhat unfamiliar on her face. "But I'm tired of running. I'm tired of letting them define who I am." Later that night, as they prepared for departure, Nora found Tarek in the Sparrow's cargo hold, organizing supplies with methodical precision. Though still thin from his captivity, He moved with increasing strength each day. "My brother says you saved his life on Helios 9, Tarek said without preamble, then risked everything to save mine. Nora shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. He would have done the same. Perhaps. Tarek studied her with the same intensity as his brother, though his eyes were a darker shade of amber. But you didn't know that when you followed that distress signal. Before she could respond, the ship's proximity alert sounded a incoming vessel requesting docking clearance. Expecting company? Tarek asked, tension evident in his posture. Actually, yes. Nora gestured for him to follow her to the airlock. Some old friends who owe me favors. The airlock cycled open to reveal a tall woman with dark skin and the bearing of a military officer, accompanied by a wiry man whose fingers never stopped moving, as if constantly calculating. Captain Dominique Reed. The woman introduced herself with a crisp nod. Former Alliance Special Operations. This is Julian Way, Systems Architect. Formerly of Helix Industries until he discovered what they were really developing. I've already briefed them on our situation, Elian explained, joining them at the airlock. And they just volunteered to help? Nora asked skeptically. Let's just say we have aligned interests, Captain Reed replied. The Syndicate and Helix have corrupted everything they've touched, including the Alliance military. What they did to you after Cirrus was just the beginning. As they gathered in the Sparrow's common area, more allies arrived, a network of resistance that had been forming in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Scientists, former military, independent operators all affected. By the growing influence of the Syndicate and its corporate partners, we can't fight them directly, Julian explained, displaying a holographic map of known Syndicate operations. But we can expose them, disrupt their research, protect their targets. Starting with the neural technology, Elian added. With Tarek's knowledge and Julian's expertise, we might even develop a countermeasure, a way to detect and block the influence protocols. As plans took shape around her, Nora found herself watching Elin, his passion, his brilliance, his unwavering determination to right the wrongs he'd been forced to participate in. When their eyes met across the room, the connection between them was palpable. Later, in the privacy of the captain's quarters, Elian's arms encircled her from behind as they looked out at the stars. Second thoughts? He murmured against her hair. Few thousand, Nora admitted with a small laugh, but none that matter. She turned in his embrace, her hands framing his face. I spent years believing I was meant to be alone. That connection was a liability, and now? His voice was soft, hopeful. In answer, Nora kissed him deeply, surrendering to the feeling she'd been fighting since the moment she'd found him in that burning facility. As the Sparrow prepared to depart Casina 6, Nora took her place at the helm, surrounded not by isolation, but by allies, by people who knew the truth and chose to stand with her anyway. Beside her, Elian plotted their course to the first target on their list, his presence a reminder of everything that had changed. Ready? He asked, his hand briefly covering hers on the controls. Nora nodded, engaging the Sparrow's engines with a familiar surge of power as the stars stretched before them, no longer just an escape route, but a path forward, toward justice, toward purpose, toward a future neither of them had believed possible until they found each other amid the flames.